All right, everyone, get ready for some intellectual heavy lifting because on this week's Physio Foundations podcast, I'm talking to physiotherapist and powerlifting champion, Chris Seville, about his very interesting clinical career, which combines physiotherapy, strength and conditioning, and powerlifting. Welcome back to Physio Foundations for another week where we talk about the knowledge and skills that provide the foundation of expert clinical practice. So in this week's episode, I'm talking to Chris Seville. Chris is a highly experienced physiotherapist with a background in sports and private musculoskeletal physiotherapy. He's the principal practice owner at Healthy Bodies Physiotherapy in Cheltenham, which is in Melbourne's southeast in Australia, of course. And he has a Bachelor of Physiotherapy degree, Bachelor of Biomedical Science degree. Here's the interesting bit. He's got a major in anatomy and exercise, and he's done quite a bit in the strength and conditioning and powerlifting area, which we're going to talk about today. I know Chris through Monash Physio. Chris worked with us in Monash University Physiotherapy for a number of years, teaching anatomy and developing curriculum for our third year Bachelor of Physiotherapy students in that final rotation on campus before they go out on placements. And Chris has been involved in research and various publications here at Monash. And in addition to all that, if that isn't enough, he also has a really highly successful clinical career where he's been in private practice for a long time, helping people with injuries, but he's also been the strength and conditioning or the strength program coordinator at Collingwood Football Club. So this is quite a big Australian rules football club in Australia, and anyone in Australia would know what that is. But if you're an overseas listener, I guess it's like saying you've worked in the Premier League in England, and if you're living in England, it's a big deal in our area. So Chris has lots of experience from his work there. In addition to his clinical career, Chris is also a powerlifting coach and an athlete himself. So he's won multiple championships and he's represented Australia at the World Powerlifting Championships. Very cool. He also holds the, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, the under 83 kilogram Australian squat record.
That's
very
correct.
Cool. So Chris, welcome to Physio Foundations. You survived your bio intro.
Thanks very much for having us, Luke. It's a pleasure to catch up again. And that rap sheet makes me feel tired just listening to it, mate. So thanks for the summary there.
Oh, that's just scratching the surface. Did I miss anything there?
No, that's a good summary of the key points there.
Didn't get anything wrong?
No, it's all correct. And it's good. It's good actually to reflect on it. Listening to those things, I've got some really fond memories of working at the uni and being involved with the students there, as well as at the footy club, and now my time here in private practice as well. Some really, really good times throughout my career.
Now, we were saying before we press record how many years it's been. So we worked together, I think 2010 to 2014. So there you go.
Yeah.
So it's time has passed pretty quickly. 2023. So how have you been? What's been happening?
Yeah, really good. So
now, since I've worked with you, you've got a young family.
I do, yeah. Two beautiful young kids. We've got Luke, who I can't lie and say he was named after you, but obviously shares your name.
I would hope not.
and little Paige. So they're both great young kids. Trying to get them involved and active as much as we can. So they do some gymnastics locally and swimming. And
good.
Really excited to announce my 2-year-old daughter is now swimming by herself, unaided. So she's doing a great job in the pool.
Those little milestones are so much fun. They're so good with kids when they get to that and that independence.
Absolutely. And then, just trying to get them as active as we can. We've bought some gymnastics rings for home as well. And,
of course you have.
You're always playing on them and mucking around. And
they'll be under the bar before we know it.
They're already doing that too. But it's it's exciting to see their little bodies develop and how they pick up skills and how they're keen to learn. It's so much fun.
So good. So, well, we know each other really well from teaching. So we've taught together in applied anatomy is the subject. So anatomy applied to humans, human movement and human conditions. It's not just the musculoskeletal in the first year. So we taught head and neck, abdo, thorax, everything across the whole body and pelvis. So I want to get into anatomy, and in part 2 of the conversation, I want to talk specifically about our anatomical interests and special interests in that area. But powerlifting, I can't help it. Can't help myself. Tell us about powerlifting. First of all, what is it?
Sure. So powerlifting is a sport. It's run in a lot of different countries, and in other countries outside of Australia, it's a very popular sport. In Australia, it's definitely growing in popularity, and it's a discipline where you perform 3 different lifts: a squat, a bench press, and then a deadlift. In a competition format, you get 3 attempts. So you perform 1 squat, then a few other people have a go, and then you perform another one, and then a few other people have a go, and then you perform another one. So the heaviest of your 3 successful lifts that's successful gets counted towards your total, just the one heaviest one. And then you do the same for bench press and the same for deadlift. And in some competitions, there's a prize for the heaviest squat, the heaviest bench, and the heaviest deadlift. And in some competitions, it's just a prize for the total of your best squat, best bench press, and best deadlift. And that's really what determines whether you're the winner or how the competition works. Yeah.
When did you get your squat record?
2011. In order to set the record, you've got to perform that. You've got to perform that squat, but then you've also got to get a successful bench press and a successful deadlift for the squat to count.
Okay.
So the funny thing is, I actually broke the record prior to setting it in November, but I was unsuccessful in that competition in posting a successful bench press. I'd selected a weight that was too heavy, and so my total didn't count, which meant my squat didn't count. Didn't get to break the record first time around, so I had to wait another couple of months to break the record, and was fortunate at that time to have it count. So that was my funny little story around that. But yeah, November.
Not funny at the time, but yeah.
Not funny at the time. That's right.
Are you still lifting? You're still training. You're fit, man. You're still. What are you doing to keep fit?
Yeah, I am still training. You mentioned before, I've got 2 young kids, so a fair bit of time spent with them, and then spent working at the practice. And so I try and find some time for training, which is mostly when the kids are in bed. But I've got a little gym set up at home, and I get in there a few times a week and lift some weights. So still trying to keep strong. I'm not quite spending as much time as I was when I was really, really seriously powerlifting, but still pushing some okay numbers and hoping to make a little bit of a comeback to the platform. I've been absent for a few years, but hoping to make a little bit of a comeback when I turn 40 and then can compete as a masters athlete.
Okay.
And also just trying to set a good example for the kids and get them involved in the gym space too. And it's nice seeing them see me in there and then start to gravitate towards developing an interest themselves. And they're always asking me if they can hang off the chin-up bar and do various other things that they see me doing in there too.
What's the culture like in powerlifting? I'm taking it, it's a fairly small community. People know each other, or is it? What's it like?
Yeah, it's a really diverse culture. I fell into powerlifting. Actually, it was one of my contacts at uni that got me involved in it. To take you back a step, I used to play a fair bit of footy, dislocated my shoulder a few times, and end up subsequently having a labral repair, and got into the gym to try and help improve the strength of my shoulder and the outcomes there in order to get back to footy more successfully. And just discovered that I really liked the gym and that I was okay at it, and started getting a bit stronger. One of the guys I was studying with at uni, Chris James, said, well, my brother's the under 90 kilo Australian champ, maybe go and have a chat to him and see if you've got some common interest. And I went and met up with David, his brother, and he invited us down to a competition, and one thing led to another, and ended up coming to train with them at Melbourne Uni, and just absolutely loved it. And the sport just opened up some doors for me in terms of learning a lot about strength training and developing my body and some things that I was interested in learning more about. And I spent a lot of time through the club, learning from the experienced athletes there and the coaches. And it was just an overall great experience. And so to draw that back to the culture that was there, my experience in powerlifting has been, a really positive one that's shaped my life in a number of different ways that when I got into it, didn't realize it was going to. And I met lots of people that I'm still friends with today, and that range of the people is a really diverse range. You've got a lot of uni students because it was at the uni, but then competing around Australia and internationally, you make friends overseas, you make friends all around the country, and people from all sorts of walks of life. Even though the club was primarily at the uni and facilitated students joining the club, there was people that were significantly older than that, in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, that were members of the club. And it was great and inspiring to see those guys that were involved with the sport for a long time, how that had physically impacted their ability. There's a guy who was in his 80s deadlifting 200 kilos. That's just phenomenal. Boggles the mind to think.
Wow.
About that and super impressive and inspiring.
That's a lifetime of never stopping, right?
Yeah,
you don't just start doing that, but that's incredible.
And then also you had guys that picked up the sport in their 60s and saw these fantastic gains as well, and that's something that again shapes your clinical practice when you see people coming to the clinic, osteoarthritic knee or whatever, and they talk about not being able to, or being nervous about getting in the gym, and you can talk about these stories that you've seen as well, and get them involved, or show some videos, and it's great from that perspective too. And then of course, with any sort of strength sports, you've got your people that are a bit more that classic meathead sort of style, and so it's this really eclectic group of people, but by and large, everyone who's there is trying to get better, trying to get stronger. And trying to help each other get stronger. So it's something that I've really enjoyed being a part of.
So that started when you were in uni. When did you hurt your shoulder?
Correct. Yeah.
When you were studying to be in your undergraduate training. Yeah.
Prior to that, so I had my reconstruction before I started studying physiotherapy, and I started dislocating my shoulder when I was 16. My reconstruction was when I was 19, which was part of when I was studying biomedical science, and then I was involved in strength training even prior to that. I'd always liked strength training. I saved up my pocket money, and when I was 14, I bought my first bench press. Bought 56 kilos worth of weights, and thought at the time that was going to do me for good. And pretty quickly outgrew that, which was great, and then stayed involved in strength training to some degree always. But it was third year physio that I found powerlifting. So that was around 2007. So, and then from then, my love for it grew, and my involvement in the sport.
So you've been doing, as a patient and a physiotherapy student, and then as a coach and also a competitor, you've been really doing this together for your whole career. So that sort of answers my question, which was, what came first, the physio or the powerlifting? So the next question is then, how do you use your powerlifting knowledge and all that training you've done and the coaching you've done with athletes in the everyday physiotherapy clinic, in your clinic with people, which you touched on before. So let's hear more about that. So how do the skills, knowledge that you've got from that level of training, how do they change what you do with patients?
They shape my practice dramatically. I spend a lot of time in the clinic gym here. I'm very passionate about giving patients exercises and ways of improving their conditions that are sustainable and are going to give them good long-term outcomes. We've got a large gym on site at the clinic, which is equipped with some weights that are heavy for even the powerlifters that are coming in. So we can really seriously get people strong. But we see a lot of the general public too. And so it's good. It's a really enjoyable part of our practice, getting in the gym, because the other clinicians are often down there as well. And one of the things about physio is you can often be quite solo. You can be in your room with your patient one-on-one, and it's a really enjoyable part of the day to get down to the gym and see the other faces and be involved together. So that's one thing I really like about the practice, being in the gym. Having the knowledge as well from the powerlifting training that I've done and being in gyms for a long period of time, I think also gives you a real breadth of different exercises that you know about, know how they feel, know how your body's meant to feel and how it's going to respond, so that you can give patients an insight about how they're likely to feel. And when you get, as physios, we're working with the injured population. So it's not like you've got a healthy individual that you can apply any exercise to. You're often then trying to think of an example that's going to change the loading with respect to this, or be a bit more gentle on that. So it's nice to have a larger list of exercises that you can draw upon to find options when plan A is uncomfortable, or it's not appropriate for whatever reason.
With all your knowledge, you'd obviously do a lot of patient education and obviously all the normal diagnosis of exclusion and referral and triaging people in that way. But do you still do, well, give us an idea of the non-strengthening and the non-exercise interventions that you would do. You've obviously got a bias, or maybe a better word is a skill in that area of strengthening. Of course, you'll use that with a lot of people, where someone that didn't have your level of training may not be able to or may not do. What else do you do apart from strength and exercise with people?
We, in a similar way to probably what most clinicians are doing, patients will come into our rooms. We have a reasonably thorough subjective examination, which obviously sets up the framework for how you're going to proceed with your assessment. Every patient will then have some form of physical assessment relating to their complaint, and then from that try and provide a provisional diagnosis for the problem, and then the treatment plan from there is typically some combination of education and advice, and then it's likely that there's going to be some exercise component to that. So we're setting up a program for them, probably in our gym space here, and then they'll conduct that in whatever environment's the most appropriate for them. So whether that's at home, whether that's at their local gym, and we offer some supervised rehabilitation options for them here as well. And then, of course, if it's necessary, we'll combine that with some manual therapy options as well. So that's, I guess, a brief overview of what a patient would expect if they were coming to attend an appointment with us.
I think it's good to look at that overview and ask you, yeah, that's interesting. So now let's compare and contrast to your work in elite sports. You worked at Collingwood Football Club and you've coached athletes. So take an elite athlete who you've got this big base of fitness already and experience and skill. So how did you use your skills to add value in that high intensity competitive environment? Must have been fun.
Yeah, definitely. It was a lot of fun, and it's great to be in that environment because it is different to the clinic. You're not worried about how much time you've got to spend with the patient. You've got an infinite amount of time. You've got an infinite amount of resources. It's quite a different environment, and there are lots of benefits to that, but there are some different challenges that come in terms of trying to find time that doesn't exist to get someone back a little bit quicker. So my experience in powerlifting helps that no end, because you're dealing with guys that, again, pushing their bodies, and from an individual perspective what that feels like, and when you pull up sore from training and it's good sore, how long that's meant to last, what good pain is, what bad pain is, and you can have those conversations with more insight, and that also shapes your clinical practice in the private practice environment too, and better how hard to push people, and what's an appropriate amount of load to try and apply. And there are lots of different barriers to getting the best performance out of people, and that experience from competing helps break down some of those barriers too.
I'm thinking now about our students, because obviously I'm a first year physiotherapy coordinator and teacher at Monash University, and you've taught there as well, but you also supervise our students as they come through your clinic. So the whole theme of this podcast is giving people the best foundations, not just of their own health and fitness, but foundations in their clinical thinking and knowledge and skills, so they can build on top of those and get the foundations right, and then the fancy stuff can sit on top of that later on in your career. So what advice could you give our students in terms of, I'm thinking still about powerlifting and gym experience. How do you compare a student who's never set foot in a gym and may never do so, to a student that takes a healthy interest and goes and does a sport or trains and already goes into the degree knowing their flexors from their extensors and knowing a few of the muscles, and having already have some training in that area?
Yep, it's a really good question, and it's one I'm quite passionate about answering, actually. And we employ 8 physios here through our clinic, and most of those are Monash graduates. And having gone through Monash myself as a student, I've got very positive things to say about the program there. And there are still variabilities, obviously, in students' knowledge and practitioners' knowledge based on personal life experiences. And my experience in the gym has no doubt shaped the way that I interact with my patients. And I think for me, it's been a hugely positive thing and something that's made me feel very comfortable in that space. And if you look at, I've been a physio now since 2008, and if you look at the way that the profession has changed, even quite significantly over that period of time, we understand more and more, and the research is mounting up more and more, that to get patients good long-term outcomes, we've got to get them active, we've got to get them stronger, we've got to try and help them understand how to pace their activity, how to train appropriately, how to load manage, and these are all things that you need experience in. And the gym space has provided me that opportunity to more intricately understand that. And the staff that I work with that have a genuine interest in spending their time in the gym, which is most of our staff, it comes to them more naturally, and they've got a broader knowledge than what you can learn through practice at uni, through reading a textbook. And so my sound advice to anybody who's considering a career in physiotherapy is that a lot of your intervention is going to be in the gym. A lot of your intervention is trying to get patients stronger. And whether you're working with 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds with osteoarthritis or falls prevention, you're still trying to get those guys stronger. Whether that's working with athletes, the more breadth of knowledge that you've got in that gym space, the more rounded you're going to be as a clinician, the more plan B, plan C type options you're going to have in your toolkit when option A doesn't work as well. And there are some subtle bits of, there are some foundation knowledge points that everybody needs to know as a physio, but there are some subtle and value add points as well that you can't learn from a textbook, that it's just so valuable to be in the gym. And I guess you're coming back to your question about what's my advice. My advice to anybody who's studying physiotherapy is walk the walk and try and write yourself a program, get involved in the gym, learn how your body works, learn how it moves, learn what it feels like to train hard, learn what it feels like to follow different programs, and then you'll be able to impart that advice and that experience onto your patients, and that's going to help them. And in my experience, that's helped them more than anything else that I've come across in my training or career.
Yeah, such an important bit of advice. You have to walk the walk. You have to actually be able to perform some of these exercises yourselves. So what if somebody is so if we think about across the spectrum of people you might see, and also therapists as well, not everyone will be able to lift heavy weights. You could still instruct and take an interest. I think you said you could still, at any level, physical, even if you had a disability yourself, you can still take an interest in those principles of training and be in that space and learn from people who are in there. Yeah,
definitely. Anyone can get strong. We're all essentially made of the same stuff. You apply a stimulus and you progressively overload it over a period of time. You allow adequate recovery for the tissue to adapt to the stimulus. You're going to get stronger. There are different barriers, based on disability and hormonal changes that occur with age that make it more challenging in some populations to develop strength, but it can still be done. Use the examples from the powerlifting club that I was talking about before, about the gentleman in his 80s, deadlifting over 200 kilos, or the guys that picked it up in their 60s and went from, not being able to deadlift very much at all to there was a lady there who was in her late 60s who picked it up just 10 years earlier and was deadlifting 130 kilos
wow.
in her 60s. So it shows us that despite those things that might be atypical in those populations, you can still develop really, really significant strength. And pain for patients as working in the physio space is often a barrier for patients who want to get involved in that. But if you can break down that barrier and help them understand that their pain is actually going to be much better if they can work through their situation and become involved in some strength training, which might feel a little bit scary to them at the beginning, their long-term outcomes, their pain is going to be much better managed, and their buffer, that they develop this buffer between coping with the activities that they need to do day to day without getting stirred up. It's one of the most effective tools that we have to help people in that situation.
And people come in with pain quite often, but aside from pain, what are the other benefits of strength training for the body? So this is very foundational knowledge, isn't it? But let's recap it. What does a strength training session over time do for your bones and muscles and ligaments and your heart, and what are the benefits?
Yeah, very, very, very widespread benefit. It's you're adapting to the stimulus. So there's changes in what's happening to the bones. There's changes happening in what's happening with the brain in terms of how you learn to do that movement more efficiently. And of course there's changes with what's happening within the muscle itself. And then there's adaptations to make the muscle tissue larger to be able to withstand larger and heavier stimulus there as well. So if you talk about that in the context of physio, we will all come across in our student placements guys in the hospital that have had falls or struggle to get out of a chair, and the strength for people in that situation is absolutely critical to their day-to-day function. It determines whether they get to go home. It determines whether they require a gait aid, and if you can get those people to improve their strength, it's going to have such a dramatic impact on their well-being, their life, and their choices as to where they live. You take someone who can take doing a squat as an example. You've got someone who is sufficiently weak, whether it's from a musculoskeletal injury or just degeneration through other things, that they find it challenging to get out of a chair, and relate that to powerlifting performance, where you're looking at the same movement pattern, which is a squat from the chair, or a squat in a competition. You want to get that athlete's stronger at squatting. You give them some weights to do. You give them a program, and they do a session. They rest some time. They do another session. They rest some time. They do another session. And gradually, as those sessions are going on, you're adding a little bit of load. At the end of the program, they've taken their squat from 150 kilos to 180. They're thrilled that they've put 30 kilos on their squat. They've performed better on the platform. They've done better in the competition. This patient that you've got finds it really tough to get out of the chair. That's their 1RM. They can do one out of the chair, and then they're cooked. It's fantastic that the patient can get out of the chair, but it's so hard for them that by the time they've done that, they feel unsteady on their feet or they're struggling. So you need to apply that stimulus. You need to find ways of giving that patient that stimulus that allows them to develop a better 1RM than getting out of the chair. And if they can do that 15 times easily in day-to-day life when they have to get off the couch or get off the chair, it's much easier for them. They're not fatigued when they've completed that task, and it's much easier for them to then get mobility to get around the house or whatever it is. And it's just finding the similarities between those situations. The movement pattern is the same, the physiology is similar, and the goal is the same, is to improve strength. And the details in the program are really based around where the individuals are at in terms of their ability, that then shapes the details in the program. But there's a lot of commonality between those situations.
That's a part of the conversation I hope everyone remembers, because we're talking to someone who's an elite athlete yourself and has worked with elite athletes, and you're talking a lot about strength training. And then earlier you talked about the people who think, well, I'm not sure that's for me, and I have trouble lifting 5 kilograms, or not sure about lifting any more than that, and there's fear and avoidance as well. And you mentioned pain, and really you're just talking about what that person's rep max is. If it's getting out of a chair or if it's lifting many kilograms on a squat rack, it's all individual, isn't it?
Absolutely. We in powerlifting, we use a formula called the Epley formula that helps us work out from someone's 1RM what their 5RM would be. You can use simultaneous equations to work it back the other way, and compare that with an 8RM or whatever it is. And so we use those formulas to help us create programs in that space. And I use exactly the same formula set up in Excel when I'm creating programs for patients in the sub-elite space as well.
Which leads me to ask you about measurement. So we've got dynamometry. We could use handheld dynamometry. You could obviously be in the gym, and the rep max or the reps you can do. What should people who don't have access to a gym space, but who are encouraging people to do strengthening exercises of any level, what are your thoughts on some of the good ways we should be measuring strength? How can we be progressing beyond the manual muscle test in general?
It's a really important thing. We have a dynamometer at the clinic. We use it regularly, and it's a really helpful adjunct to our sessions here. But it's really important to assess strength functionally too. And so if you look at the principles of strength training, load is so critical to that. If you take someone's ability and they're capable of squatting 60 kilos, for example, and you give them a program that never takes them up to 60 kilos, the program isn't efficiently developing their strength. You need to find a load that's going to challenge them. That load needs to be progressively overloaded, so that there is development in that strength. And so having an assessment of strength that's relatable to the task is really critical. So if you want to improve someone's squat performance, assess their squat performance. And using something like the Epley formula is really helpful, where someone might have a barrier or might not be practical to assess their 1RM, but you can use a 5RM to then predict what a 6 or a 1RM might be. But have a look at the task that you're wanting to improve. That's my advice. And there's lots of different creative ways that you can do this in a clinic setting that doesn't have a gym, or in a patient's home. You've just got to pick some activities that are relevant for that person. And so a lot of the time in physiotherapy, we're dealing with a unilateral injury. So you want a unilateral strength assessment. And that could be something like a step up, trying to find out what height that patient then has biomechanical breakdown or has an inability to perform the task. It might be a single leg sit to stand. One of the really rudimentary tests that we can do here is we've got some boxes at different heights, and get someone to perform a single leg squat, right leg, left leg off a certain height, and there'll be a critical height where they can't perform that task on one side but can on the other. And that's a really meaningful thing to the patient to be able to see, gee, I know you said to me that it looks like my muscles on this side aren't quite as good, but they can then really see, gee, this is affecting my performance. And often that's a really helpful motivator for them to tip into your rehab. And there are lots of other little tests like that you can do too, or a similar test in a different way. Give them 30 seconds, ask them to do as many as they can on one side versus on the other side from a standardized height, whether it's a bench or a lower box. And they perform 12 on one side and 8 on the other side, and they see that after they get to 8 on that side, they just can't keep reproducing. That can be a really valuable way of assessing it as well.
So really the principle there, to summarize that, if you're measuring strength with someone, even if you have limited equipment, it really has to be meaningful and relevant to that person. And those functional measurements of strength have a lot of relevance. It doesn't have to be something that's you do 20 years of powerlifting training plus your extra qualifications and work at Collingwood Football Club and own a practice with a gym in it. You talked about a protocol that had a couple of boxes.
Exactly right. You've got to look at your setting and work out what can I do in this space. And it doesn't really matter what space you've got access to. In every consultation room, you're going to have a plinth and a chair. Certainly in terms of doing lower limb assessments, there's a couple of examples we just talked through that work in that space there. And if you're looking at hips or core strength or whatever it is, there's almost anything in that setting that you can do body weight. And if your patient's coming in with a complaint relating to something that they're struggling to do with their day-to-day function, it'd be good to try and pick something that replicates that movement or is relatively similar.
All right, time for the question that I ask everyone. You ready? What are the most important foundational knowledge and skills for a physiotherapist?
Clearly, we've been talking a lot about strength training, so it's probably reasonably easy for me to segue into that. I think having a foundation knowledge of strength training, gym exercises, and how your body moves and responds to those stimuluses is absolutely critical. And for me, that's, as I said earlier, that's shaped my practice very, very significantly. The other one, you talked about my experience in teaching anatomy and through my studies at Monash. Again, for me, that's an absolute foundation point for any physiotherapist. And if you don't know what's there well enough, you're not going to consider it as part of your assessment or as part of your potential diagnosis. And that makes it much more challenging when you're looking at things that don't necessarily follow a typical pattern or aren't part of a common injury profile. And so having a good foundation knowledge of anatomy that's absolutely critical for any physiotherapist.
The straw man argument for anatomy is, well, if the person's functioning in this way anyway, does it matter about all the details and what's happening beneath there? But if we then strongman the argument again and come back to it, that sounds apt because we're talking about strength training, everything. We'll strongman the argument again. Why is it so important to really know what's happening, the detail, the specific details? Now, we teach anatomy at Monash and other programs do as well. In physiotherapy, programs are known for really detailed, really specific anatomy training where you really understand the finer details of each area. And we spend a lot of time in each area and then integrating that into case-based learning and physiotherapy and everything else in that area. So the students are really proficient for the knee, for example, spending a whole couple of weeks on that area. Why is it so important to know that anatomy? And I guess a double-barrel question, how do you continue to learn anatomy? How did you continue, apart from teaching it, how did you continue to keep up the speed with it?
So, and really important questions, I think, for anyone in physiotherapy, but particularly your younger listeners out there. So why is it important? It's important because that's what's there. You know, it's at times I can see the counter argument to something like low back pain, where your intervention might not vary that dramatically on what your pathoanatomical diagnosis is of the condition, because the principles for treatment might be relatively similar. You're looking at more the subjective history of what that patient is reporting their AGs to be, how irritable their condition is, and you're trying to break down these barriers and help them understand how to do those activities better or with a more appropriate load. And your intervention is based more around those principles. But there are certainly instances that are different to that, where we are managing conditions where it's really critical to have a pathoanatomical diagnosis and the tissues behave differently to one another. I guess a really obvious example that jumps to mind is you take a calf injury versus an Achilles injury, and the way that those two tissues function differently, and the implications for the rehab is hugely significant. So you want to do something that's hard for a calf muscle, do 10 heavy calf raises, and by the end of that you'll say, oh, my calf is, it's really worked. That was really tough. But for an Achilles tendon, it's a relatively short change in length. It's not a rapid movement because we've just said it's heavy. The Achilles tendon is probably not going to find that activity all that hard. Flip it around. You ask the patient then to do one really explosive hop. That's not that hard for the calf muscle. It's just done one hop. It's not going to cause a significant amount of fatigue. But the Achilles tendon is going to find that particularly hard because it's a rapid change in length, and so it's a much more challenging activity for that Achilles to do. And so that's, I guess, the first example that just jumped to my head in terms of how the anatomy will really guide the rehabilitation and the return to sport programming for an individual with a calf pathology versus an Achilles pathology.
Yeah. And then the challenge is if you have a really extensive training in anatomy in your undergraduate course or a postgraduate entry to practice physio course, and then the years pass by as they do reliably, how do you maintain your anatomical knowledge? And I guess these days, at least, we're really lucky because there are lots of amazing resources online. There's a lot of free anatomy content you can just access. You can find that. Postgrad courses, of course, teaching is an amazing way to improve your confidence in your knowledge. You have to prepare. I remember doing about 8 hours in 2010 when you and I, you started 2010 as well.
I reckon I started doing some stuff 2009.
Okay, so yeah. So you were there. That's right. And I was new that year, but we were both there just talking about how many hours we'd spent as tutors in our own time, unpaid, just swatting up and preparing and learning our anatomy. Now we're on the nerdy end of the scale to the cool people up here and the nerds down here, right? Which is a compliment to us. So we're doing that, right? That's some significant motivation because you're about to go and take a group of 15 students there, and you're being their leader, their facilitator.
Absolutely.
I guess there's degrees of this. You could spend an hour a week on it as well. But what about with your employees and your colleagues in the clinic? Any way you integrate anatomy into your training, your PD in the clinic?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is something that you've got to find a way of including it in your week. Certainly it's really easy if you don't touch the detail to for that to grey out in your memory.
Right.
And I completely agree. Nothing improved my anatomy knowledge like having to teach it to a bunch of students. You need to know it back to front when you're doing that. Same as you, I used to prepare significant hours per week for those classes. You want to ensure you're doing a good job, but you certainly feel nervous about going into a situation like that and not knowing the content. Nowadays, I'd love to lie and say I stay up late at night reading the textbook for bed and that sort of thing, but it's probably not the first thing on my mind every day when I'm looking at what I'm going to spend my time doing. So you've got to find other ways of getting it into your week and getting it into your day so that you are touching on the detail and it stays sharp in your focus. So in the setting that I'm in now, we run a PD program where I catch up with our more junior physiotherapists one-on-one every week, and we also do a group PD with the junior team every week, and then with the more senior team, we do that at least once a month as a group, and then as well as that, we're catching up one-on-one. So I've got, as the practice principal, I've got lots of those catch-ups that I'm going to, and every one of the staff is coming to some of that as well. And so as part of those discussions, we're regularly involving anatomy in the discussion. We've got with the junior program, we've got a series that we're working through at the moment, which is about 6 to 8 weeks of going through some knee-related material. And as part of that material, we'll always do a review of the anatomy first. Our last section that we went through was shoulder, and we did a very similar sort of thing there, where we talked through the anatomy and the functional anatomy of the joints there as well, and then talk about the often the common cases, and then work through the different assessments and implications for treatment based on different diagnoses, and that's kind of the model that we tend to use with the junior program. The senior program tends to be a little bit more case based, but we're still always tying it back to the principles of anatomy, and that's how I keep it in my practice now. And I also like spending my time educating patients about what's there. I think they often appreciate that information, and whilst you're still giving it to them in lay terms, if you're explaining to them what some imaging looks like or what their condition is, it's an opportunity for you again to draw upon that detail, and it helps to keep it fresh.
I hadn't thought about that in terms of when you're providing patient education and to mentoring younger clinicians as well. All of that is brushing up on your anatomy, and many hands make light work. You're there with a group and you're doing some functional, some clinical anatomy background before you then present on the shoulder or the knee in the session. So having a good mentor, having a good clinic, working with like-minded people and people who are bringing that opportunity to professional development into the clinic, like Chris. If you worked in Chris's clinic, you'd have that opportunity. That's something Brian Kim and Jake Waller and I've spoken to Monash grads on this podcast about the importance of finding a place. If you want to push yourself along as a clinician, you've got to find someone like you, Chris, to work with, who's going to put those opportunities in front of you. It's not a matter of just sitting there reading the textbook at midnight after you've seen 12 clients that day. And I better catch up on my anatomy. It should be just integrated into what you're doing, right?
That's exactly it. And that's, for me, certainly it's not how the knowledge goes in. You can read it once and pick up a couple of things, but again, unless you go back and read it regularly or touch on it regularly, it's not going to stay in there. And I think the other point that I reckon is important for the junior physios listening as well is that I think everyone expects that you've learned it once, you've touched on it at uni, and then that knowledge is just there, and you should have it forever and ever and ever. It doesn't work like that. We all know that it doesn't work like that. And so if you grey on an area, that's okay, but speak up about it. Don't feel intimidated by that. Just work on it and bring that up as a point with your mentors as well, and tell them that that's part of what you want to continue to have in the professional education at your clinical setting. And I think that's something that everyone will welcome and benefit from.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's before we press record or not, or whether it's or afterwards. I don't know whether I've said this or not, but I mentioned part 2 of our conversation was going to be about clinical anatomy. And then we went ahead and had a really good conversation about it then. I think for today, I think we're going to leave it there in terms of the content, because you're a busy man. You got to get back to your work. Let's wrap this one up, but I would really like to chat to you again. Good excuse to catch up, and it'd be really good to dive deeper into these topics. I did have one more question. It was back to strength, actually. Yeah. We've talked about the importance of being immersed in doing exercise yourself in any capacity, and how much benefit that gives you in terms of prescribing exercise, for example. What if you were a new grad or a physio student or a clinician of any level, and you wanted to upskill in the specifics of strength training? You mentioned some of the specifics there in this episode. What are some training courses, or where would you direct people to upskill in those first few years?
That's a good question. Most of my knowledge came through just being involved in the environment and training with other people that had been involved in the environment for a long time. And so there was a lot of knowledge that just came through that application. In the earlier days, there was some books and bits and pieces that I read that sort of gave me that little bit of a foundation knowledge. And I think you can get that foundation knowledge about the principles of strength training and different programs and different exercises that are good from some of that material. And I think what I'm also trying to address is that I think it's really important that you try and get into some sort of environment where you can learn organically through the experience of others that have spent some time developing their knowledge in that space as well. And then separate to that, there are some courses that are run through the APA and through other organisations like Fitness Australia, which is obviously the personal trainer's kind of equivalent, where you can do some knowledge about strength training as well. I taught on a powerlifting coaching course, which is run through Powerlifting Australia for a while, so several years ago, and that is probably a good foundation knowledge about strength training and programming as well. And there are some other physiotherapists that run through the APA some strength conditioning courses as well.
And for overseas listeners, that's the Australian Physiotherapy Association. You might look at your own professional association or take that idea from Chris and look more broadly than just Instagram. There's a few ideas there from Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look, there was one that I did early in my career, which was run by Wayne Rogers. And again, it's different to powerlifting. It's a really functional look at strength training, and it's really good just to hear different perspectives on strength training. And that was a course, even though I had a wealth of knowledge in powerlifting at that stage, and I had been competing for a few years by myself. And it's always good to have a look at someone else's perspective on programming and apply principles, see how they apply principles in a different way.
But if you're listening to this right now, you're about to go back into the clinic or go back to the clinic on Monday, for example, and you want to have some take-home messages from this. And you mentioned earlier just the importance of, if you're going to measure strength or prescribe an exercise, that does need to be meaningful to that person. And it doesn't always have to be a powerlifting champion coming in trying to get an extra 5% on the plates, right? It's the example you gave of a person who can't get out of a chair or has a balance deficit. So we always need to relate to all types of people could benefit from these principles you're talking about. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. I don't think, different people have different ideas about how they want their body to look and all of this sort of different things. And so you can not like the look of being more muscular or whatever, but you ask anyone if they'd like to be stronger, if they benefit from being stronger, it's definitely something that is going to benefit nearly every human being. People
worry about putting muscle on and body image. Isn't it quite challenging to put muscle on for a lot of people? It's not that.
Absolutely. And look, that is still something that I see as a barrier in the consultation room here as well. People, stereotyping a little bit, but particularly female patients will have concern about starting a strength program, even though it's designed at trying to help improve their injury health or relating to the injury that they've specifically presented for. There can be some reluctance around starting a program because of not wanting to look too bulky. And absolutely, you're correct in what you're saying. been in the gym for a heck of a long time, and it's hard to pack on muscle. You shape your diet, you shape your sleep, you shape your training around all this sort of stuff, and you commit yourself to doing it over a period of years and years and years, and it still happens really slowly. So.
Wow. You're not going to go there to rehab an injury and do a few deadlifts and squats and suddenly get.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's quite work like that. Yeah. So again, it just comes back down to appropriate education for that patient, and it's just a lack of education and knowledge on their part that they don't know, because they haven't been in that space before, what adaptations they can expect and what that's likely to look like. And you just need to continue to provide the right education around this is what you're likely to expect, and this is how it's going to benefit you, and these are the likely changes that you're going to see in your physical appearance as well. We
can talk forever about all the education that should be added to university courses and what should be taught, and we've had previous episodes on that. But as you've said, most of the learning you do happens in the field, on the job, and in your life and your own experience. So you've given everyone a number of really interesting ideas about strength training, I guess courses and mentors and different ways they could implement that into their practice. Anything else you wanted to add, Chris, before we wrap this thing up?
I think we've covered most of it, but I guess circling back to the key thing for me is that if you're setting yourself up now for a career in physiotherapy and you haven't spent much time in the gym, find your local gym, find some people that you can become involved with to learn from their experience, and it will be one of the most meaningful things that you do to try and help improve your enjoyment from your career and the effectiveness in your career. Feeling confident in that space is so crucial.
There you go, everyone. Some solid advice there from Chris, and you heard it from him, not just from me. So really good. So hopefully this adds to the body of mentoring advice we've been building up here on the podcast. But really grateful for your time, Chris. So where can people connect with you online and find out more about you? And
sure.
Google search, social media.
Yeah, absolutely. We look through the clinic. We've got our own social media on Instagram and Facebook, and my information is available on our clinic website as well, which is healthybodiesphysiotherapy.com.au. So if you're interested to know a bit more about me, or you've got some questions about strength training as a new physio coming through, I'm more than happy for people to reach out and start some dialogue around that as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll put the Healthy Bodies Physio website and the social media tags and everything in the show notes. So if you want to track Chris down and have a look at some of the work he's doing there in the clinic, and you can see what he looks like if you look at the YouTube version of this. A bit of delay of uploading those. I'm focusing on the podcast here, but eventually that will make its way to the Periton Physio YouTube channel. So search Periton Physio in YouTube, and there's only one of them, and that will appear. And you can also find Susanna and I at Periton Physio on various social media, mostly on Facebook and Instagram. And you can find me on Twitter at Luke Periton, and make sure you do all the things we want you to do: like, share, subscribe. The reason for that is if you found it interesting, I'm sure someone else will as well. And podcasts just tend to sit there unless they're shared by word of mouth. So if you can share this with some students or colleagues, or friends, or anyone, and tag us in, that's the way you can pay us for our efforts here in making this valuable content for you. I found it valuable. I hope you did too. So Chris, thanks very much for a great conversation, and let's do it again soon.
Thanks for having us on, Luke, and mate, great to catch up, and let's not leave it so long next time.
Yeah, for sure. That was really good. So until next time, this is Chris and Luke wishing you all the very best with your studying, professional development, and lifelong learning.